Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I am so glad you're here and that you're able to join us today for the second session in our legislative training series. I am Sarah Lochner, Executive Director of the Oregon Coalition of Local Health Officials. I use she, her pronouns, and with me today is a special guest, Stacy Cowan from Multnomah County. Stacy, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stacy Cowan. I use she, her pronouns. I work in government relations at Multnomah County.
And before we get started, I do want to encourage you to turn off your camera and eat your lunch during this presentation. This is being recorded over the lunch hour, and we want you to take the time to eat a healthy, nutritious lunch. Take care of yourself. While you are eating, feel free to take notes and jot down any questions that you may have along the way. Save those for the end, and we will do our best to answer them before we wrap up. We are recording this webinar so that others may access this information beyond today, so keep that in mind. And with that, let's look at our agenda. So today we're going to talk about how to use the Oregon legislature.gov website. We are going to look at how to find and watch a committee hearing online, how to use OLIS, otherwise known as the Oregon Legislative Information System. We are going to walk through how to read a bill and how to read an amendment. And first up, Stacy is going to talk us through how to navigate the Oregon Legislature website. And I am going to switch over to that screen real quick.
Perfect. I'll just wait for Sarah to pull that up. Okay, great. Thank you so much. All right, so the main landing page for the legislature is oregonlegislature.gov or GOV. And one of the things I was thinking about as I was thinking about how to talk about this website is it is incredibly user-friendly. And as part of that, you'll find that there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of different ways to do sort of similar things. And so we'll walk through and show you some of the main features of the website and some of sort of like the quickest ways to get information you might be looking for. But I highly recommend, if you have a few moments, if you're interested, take some time to just sort of like poke around the website, because there's really a lot of great information. And again, you might find little items and resources and tools that'll be useful for you at different times, depending on what information you're looking for. So the first thing that I want to share is you'll see every day you'll see an updated list of events at the Capitol. And of course, that has turned into sort of actual physical in-person events as well as remote events. And so especially during session, this is a really great resource for any meetings that might be happening during the day. And you'll notice that over on the right-hand side, so you see it right now, it just says historic portion of the Capitol closed for construction. That's the only thing happening in the Capitol today. But you might see a list of hearings that are happening, and over under location, you can very simply click on those items and it'll take you right to the hearing, which all hearings are remote. There's a remote option, even when we are back in person beginning in December, and of course during the 2023 legislative session. Oh, great. Thank you, Sarah, for showing that. So you'll see she clicked on the calendar. So that's another great tool. So if you want to see today's events, you can do that. You can also select another date in the future. And I think you can even go into the past and see items that are happening. So you'll see that on this date, this was on September 15th at 1 o'clock, there was a joint task force on universal healthcare. And all you would need to do is click on remote A, and that'll take you to the actual hearing. So it's a super quick shortcut. Since this happened in the past, this is a recording of the hearing. And again, going back to the point around redundancy, we'll show you there's a lot of different ways to get to different committee hearings, but this is a really simple way to find out what's happening on any given day. Let's look at some of the tabs up top, and I'll kind of walk you through some of the other information that you can find. So you'll see under the Senate tab, there is a lot of different information about senators. So you can look up senators, a full list of every elected senator. You can look them up by district, by political party, or you can click on find out who represents me. Sarah, do you want to go ahead and click on all senators just so we can get a sense of, oh, sorry.
Sure, I can do that. I just clicked on the wrong one. All senators, you got it.
I just want you to get a sense of, like, you know, if you're trying to find a particular senator, if you're either looking by district, if you're looking by name, this is a really quick reference to be able to find what their office number is. You can find phone number, email, you can find out where to find them in the Capitol. And you can get a little bit more information about them. Senators and all representatives, I think, have control over sort of what information they share. Some of them have bios on their website. Some are more detailed than others. But again, this is a really quick way to be able to find some of that information. If you go back up, and will you hover over Senator again? You'll notice also sort of next to that list of senators, you see Senate leadership. And this will be mirrored again when we look at the House tab. But what's really great is this is a quick reference to know who is the Senate president, who's the president pro tem, the Democratic leader, and the Republican leader. And then over to the right, again, you'll see Senate President Office, Democratic Caucus, Republican Caucus, and Secretary of the Senate. So it's probably not often that you need some of that information, but it's a really great resource if ever you're trying to either figure out who is an elected leadership, or if you're trying to get quickly to these individuals and their contact information. Go ahead and go over to the House. So again, you're going to see all of the same things under here. One little trick that I did want to show you, that's something that I tend to use quite a bit, but if you go over to the chief clerk of the House, this is the person who's in charge. This office is in charge of sort of running things on the House side. This is a great space for a little bit of like an overview of what's happening in the legislature. One of the things that I use pretty frequently here is the legislative calendar over on the right. And this is a great tip just for if you're trying to remember certain key dates and deadlines. Right now, what we have is we have the interim calendar that's posted, and this goes through January 9th. And as session starts to roll out, once they decide different deadlines for the legislative session, you'll see those calendars available and just different information available in this spot. So this is always a good tip if you're looking for specific information about the legislature. And again, since this is the chief clerk side on the House side, there's also good information in the top middle there around different deadlines and House schedule and all of that information that, of course, will be repopulated when session starts.
And Stacy, I'll just jump in real quick and say that in our previous training in the part 1 session, we did talk about legislative deadlines and how the legislature has internally built these deadlines to ensure that session runs on schedule and that the legislature completes its work by the constitutional sine die date. And so we did talk a little bit about some of the interim calendar dates and kind of made vague allusions to potential deadlines for this coming session. But when those deadlines are set hard and fast by the leadership, they will be posted here.
Yeah, that's great. All right, just kind of moving along. The next tab over is bills and laws. This is a really great resource if you ever want to go back and either look at different laws that have passed in previous sessions or look at the Oregon Revised Statute. I'll show you just one link here that I tend to use a lot. And again, I highly recommend, if this is of interest to you, to kind of poke through here and see what information you can find. And maybe Sarah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that you can very easily through this system find information back to, I believe, 2007. And I believe, does that sound right? And then prior to that, you really have to dig into your legislative research skills and go to the state library. And at some point, you're looking at microfiche if you're trying to look much earlier than that. So, hopefully most of your legislative research doesn't take you beyond that, but there's a lot of good information that's available pretty easily through this system here. So again, one of the places that I'll look is over under on the far right under Oregon Revised Statute, 2021 Oregon Revised Statutes. Now, what's important about this is that, so every session, they pass another selection of bills and the law is updated. But those are sort of individual standalone revisions to the law. It takes quite a bit of work for them to actually go back and officially update Oregon's revised statute. So that's why this says 2021 edition, because the laws that were passed in 2022 haven't necessarily been incorporated into this in its entirety. You think about, amending sort of, I always envision the old tombs of the actual books. So that's just an important note to remember that, it does take some time and it does take staff work to go through and do all of those official revisions. So keep that in mind when you're kind of doing research. I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything to add to that in terms of the work that you've done.
Nope, that sounds perfect.
So sometimes what I'll do is, so say, whatever it might be, I might be looking up, I might want to understand certain definitions that are in law, or might want to look at current revised statute when I'm thinking about the impact of a bill that might be coming up. And so I'll frequently come to this and I'll scroll down, and usually, you kind of know, if you know what chapter you're looking for, you can click on let's see, maybe under volume 3, landlord, tenant, domestic relations, and probate, chapters 90 through 130. If you want to click on that volume button, so then you see that you've got then the different title numbers. And if you go ahead and click on the first one, Sarah, under property rights, this even gives you the different chapters, and you see that there are different titles that are within that. And if you select the chapter, it actually will take you to the full revised statute. If you want to click, yeah, that's the first one right there. Again, I don't know how often you might need this, but this is just a really great resource if ever you're wanting to be someone. I am someone who likes to do this occasionally, to go back and do your own research and to understand what the current revised statute might say as it might relate to different bills that are coming through. And what you'll see is at the top, there's a very short sort of outline of what happens within each chapter and under each sort of section. And then further down, it'll be all of the detailed statutes. So I just wanted you to get a sense of, how you can do your own legislative research, how you can read current law. And I frequently find myself doing keyword searches when I'm in here. That really will help you jump to the certain parts that you're looking for, whether it's a statute citation or if it's a certain word or definition or different pieces that you're looking forward to. So we can go ahead and back out of all of this. Looking over to the next tab. So we have the committees tab. So kind of back to sort of the functioning of the legislature. This is a great place to find the agendas that are posted for different committees. So you'll see that you can find hearings, today's meetings. That'll give you a list of any meetings that are scheduled for the current day. Agendas online is going to be a link for any agenda that's been posted. So some committees will post their agendas for a week at a time. There are different deadlines. They have to give you at least at the beginning of session, I believe it's 72 hours notice. That notice period will diminish and shorten as session goes on. But this link will give you any agenda that's posted at any given time. And then over to the right, you'll see committee assignments. So Senate committee assignments, House committee assignments. So say you want to talk to everyone on House healthcare, you could simply click on House committees. You'll see that that's open. This is a list of all of the existing committees at the time. You can click on healthcare. And this takes me to the committee page. So earlier I had mentioned there was a lot of redundancy that's built into the system. This is another way to get to, so say you know that you wanted to watch a healthcare committee, but you couldn't remember what day. So this is a way to get to the healthcare committee, and over to the right, you'll see all of the past meetings that they've had. We've got a list of all of the members of the committee. You know who chairs the committee. At the top, you see Representative Rob Nose. Below that, you have a list of the staff as well as a phone number. And then scrolling down, you'll see when session is in, it'll indicate what their regular meeting schedule is, so you can get a sense of how often they're meeting. So right now, we're in the interim in between sessions. So this says House Interim Committee, and of course it says 2021, 2022 interim. So there's slightly less information, but this will be populated with a lot of information once session has started.
Stacy and Sarah, there's
Yeah.
a question in the chat from Florence. She asked, is public health under healthcare or human services?
It's almost always under healthcare.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. But that is up to the discretion of the legislature, and it's usually, they do try to be thoughtful about giving sort of equal amounts of work to different committees. So you'll see sometimes the committee makeup might change. For example, in the interim, healthcare and behavioral health, or I'm sorry, am I saying that right? I think healthcare and behavioral health were two separate committees, and I believe we're going to see those combined into one.
Right, and previously there was the COVID-19 committee, which has, I believe, been, disbanded for now. So they do have the discretion to create additional committees if they want to.
That's right, yeah.
And I'll just point out here, so for example, if you click on the date, you'll get the full list of speakers and the sort of run of show of that committee hearing. So you can see if it's worth your time to watch, if they cover the topic that you were interested in. And then if you wanted to watch the video of this particular hearing, you would just click on this play button over here on the left, and that would take you to the video of that particular hearing. And in that video, you can also skip ahead. Here they've started to timestamp things a little bit, so you can skip ahead to the portion that you're most interested in.
And during session, what's great is you'll see that where that meetings list is, you'll see former meetings as well as upcoming meetings that have an agenda posted. So, they group them by session. And so the interim, once we go from the interim and we go officially into session, the list will sort of start fresh, and you'll have the new committee. If there are changes, that'll be reflected in the committee. But again, it's nice because it'll have all of their past hearings as well as any future hearings. So you can really track all of the work that's being done in one sort of concise space.
And I just had another thought to clarify Florence's question. I think the main reason the public health is usually under the healthcare committee is because the budget goes through OHA. And so that goes through essentially they lump OHA's business all under healthcare.
That's right. That's a really good point. Yeah. Let's see. I think we can go ahead and go back. We were under the committee tab. I know we're kind of jumping pretty quickly through here, but I want to give you a flavor of like all of the information that kind of exists. Let's go ahead and go back again to the main OLIS page. Excuse me. Under committees, I did want to just point your attention that, obviously we're sharing information about how to use the system, but the legislative website actually has a lot of information about how to testify, how to submit testimony. They have an e-subscribe section. So you'll see that committee participation section. There's a lot of good information and resource there for the general public about how to really track what's happening in the committee and what's happening at the legislature. And then the last thing that I'll point out is all the way over to the right under publications and reports. We don't have to go into this, but again, if you're interested, this is a really interesting place because committees will do work in the interim and even during session, and sometimes they'll publish what's called background briefs. There's a required by statute. This is the place where you find different reports. Sometimes you can find, say there was, I know one time the committee did a background brief on, emergency management volunteers. And so then they post it to the website. So again, it's kind of an interesting little space. There's a variety of topics, but it's just something to flag if you're interested. You can click on that and search through there. And sometimes you can find legislative history that's all kind of concisely pulled together on any given topic. And I've used that before when I've kind of done different legislative projects. I think, let's see, there's the Get Involved tab, which again has more of the like how to visit the Capitol, they've got how an idea becomes a law, some other really good resources about kind of how to use the website and how to engage with the legislature. And then the last tab is Capitol offices. So this is sort of the, you know, the functions that exist in addition to the legislature. So there's a couple of, you know, the Legislative Fiscal Office, Policy and Research. You know, I'm not sure how often you might need this, but this is again a good resource for some of those other offices that exist inside the Capitol.
And I would say too that if if you are a member of the coalition of Oregon's coalition of local health officials, if you're reaching out to these folks, please let me know. Because these are, like we talked about in the last session, legislative fiscal does have a lot of sway over the OHA budget. And so I would definitely want to be included or at least aware of what conversations you're having there.
Sarah, maybe just, oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna, maybe one last wrap up. If you want to go back to the main OregonLegislature.gov page. The last thing I just wanted to show you again, this is that first landing page. Over on the right, there was a couple of other places we saw this, but you can do the find your district and legislator. You know, as part of sort of engaging with the legislature, it's always nice to know, even when you're doing it through a coalition, it's always nice to know who your representative is. And especially given that we have redistricting that'll be taking effect, this is a great place to plug in your address and figure out exactly who all of your elected representatives are as you're sort of engaging in different advocacy efforts. And I think I'll pause there. I think that's sort of all I wanted to point out. Again, there's so much information here. I highly recommend sort of poking around on your own when you have some time.
Thank you, Stacy. So the next thing we're going to talk about is OLIS specifically, the Oregon Legislative Information System. So there is a direct link to it here on the Oregon Legislature homepage. And while Stacy did cover quite a bit of it, because there, as she mentioned, there are some redundancies in this system. Here you can see that this is a really handy landing page on any given day during legislative session, because you can see the meetings that are happening that day, just like you can on the homepage. But also what's helpful is the third readings. So this is basically the bills that will be voted on in the full chamber that day. So you can see, and you can kind of see almost in real time as they're ticked off the list, as they go through them, the staff updates this page so that you can kind of follow along from home. You can also watch the full floor from the homepage as well, because there will be a link to the floor sessions. So this is a great space. So again, during legislative session, this will have a lot more information on it, but just that landing page is helpful. The real key to utilizing OLIS, I believe, is this session button. This is where you start. So all of the bills and hearings are really organized by legislative session. You can't search for a bill across all legislative sessions. So that is kind of one weakness of the system, if you see it that way. So if you're like, oh, I know maybe 5 or 7 years ago, there was this bill on tobacco retail licensure, and I can't remember what was in it. Well, you're going to have to basically go through and search each one of these regular sessions to figure that out. So for our purposes today, though, we're not going to do that. We are just going to focus in on the 2022 legislative session and one particular bill. But before we get to that, we'll choose the 2021 regular session, which was a long session. It was our last long session. And then under that, you can search for bills. If you know the bill number, you can search for that. Let's just make up a number here and click go, you can see all the bills that have 201 in them. So, and then if you hover over each bill, you can see a basic summary of what each bill is so that you know if you want to click on it or not. Now, most likely, if you're like me, you can't remember the bill number because they all run together at a certain point. And so often searching for the text through the text is much more helpful. So if you wanted to search for a tobacco related bill and you wanted to search the full text, then click go. You can see all the bills that have the word tobacco in them. And then again, if you hover over, you can see Tobacco 21, Senate Bill 64, created exemption to prohibition on a person under 21 years of age entering an establishment where tobacco products or inhalant delivery systems are sold. So that is a useful tool, but again, it doesn't search across sessions. It only searches the session that you've chosen at the top. And if, for example, you know that Senator Steiner Hayward introduced some bill but you can't remember what it was, you can search by legislator. So here you can choose senators. You can scroll down to Steiner Hayward. You can choose her chief sponsor list. So these are all the bills that she was a chief sponsor of that session. And you can see the summary as you hover over it and figure out which bill it is that you were trying to remember. So then honestly, like, I don't even know what's under this more tab. Oh, look, more ways to get to the committee agendas, measure information, more reports and documents, and legislative data available to the public. I will have to nose around there at a later date and see what else is there. But they're always adding features too. So sometimes new things show up and you're like, oh, look at that. So let's go to, or before I move on, Stacy, did you have anything to add about utility of this basic page?
No, I think that those are all of sort of the main features. And again, I think you just proved there's so much information. I think the key is to get comfortable with the website and start with just sort of some of the basics. And then, like Sarah said, they're always adding different features. So once you get comfortable, don't be afraid to kind of click on different things and see what other information you can provide. Because I really think there's a lot of really great resources here for folks.
Yeah, and just to the redundancy point again, under the committees tab, again, you can, rather than going back to the home page, you can get to the committees here as well. And so let's just choose healthcare, since that's our thing. And here you can see all the lists for this, for the 2021 session, all the hearings they had. You can get to the recorded content. If it's an informational, or this I is there, they actually canceled the meeting. So as you can see, they really don't meet after the end of May, unless they want to hold an informational hearing. So usually the bill deadlines have passed by that point, and so their work for that session is done. So they usually cancel those remaining meetings. But yeah, just another way to navigate. And then one other thing too, you can, under this assigned measures tab here, you can see all the bills that they were assigned. And you can see the status of them. So, so for example, you can see that these 3 bills here that say in Senate committee, those bills did not advance. So those bills died, as we say. These other bills, like chapter number assigned, that means that bill passed. And so it's a helpful place to see what bills are there and what bills. So one way to utilize this information is if you're looking for a particular relating to clause and bills that are still in the committee, this would be a good place to look for that. And next time we'll talk a little bit more about, or in the next session, we'll talk a little bit more about relating clauses. So with
Sarah,
that,
Florence has a question about whether there's a way to search for bills that have been pre-positioned for the upcoming session, which is a great question. So I'm happy to take an attempt at that, and then Sarah, of course, please correct me if I'm wrong or jump in. But we can talk about this upcoming session as a good example. So right now we've passed the draft deadline. If folks wanted bills drafted, they had to meet that certain deadline. We expect to get those bills back by December 5th. And then if you'd like your bill to be pre-session filed for session, you can submit those. I believe it's by the 21st of December. But the important point is that through that entire process, there is no way to see what other bills individuals are working on until they file those bills. And then once those are filed, they then are going to be made public once session is officially gavelled in. Before that, it's just up to the sponsor or the legislator to share a copy of a bill. It's not public until session is officially underway and until the bill has been filed. And at that point, it's gone from a legislative concept to an actual bill. It's given a bill number, and then it's available on the website.
And I would say there might be a little bit of an early preview to that, Stacy. You can correct me if I'm wrong. Is that when members, let's say Steiner Hayward has a bill, she might give a copy of that bill to Senate Healthcare and want to come and talk about that bill in advance of session. And
that's right. Yeah.
So sometimes as a part of that committee hearing, an early copy of that bill will be seen on the committee page. And so that is, by paying attention to legislative days, that is how people like me find out, and get copies of those early bills.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that is usually what we see is, in my experience, I feel like those are usually committee bills because committees are allowed to request a certain number of bills. And at that point, they are still legislative concepts. And December is usually the time when you start to see those daylighted. So committees, and sometimes it'll even say on the agenda, legislative concepts for 2023 session. And then the committee may either just discuss them, or they may actually post to the meeting materials for that committee actual copies of those. But again, at that point, they're legislative concepts. They're not officially bills yet. They don't become bills until session has begun. And then one other thing I did think about, Sarah, is it's an important distinction. So in my early days of lobbying, you didn't see the bills until session gavelled in on day one of session. In the last several sessions now, my memory is failing a little bit on how long we've been doing this, but they've been doing what they call organizational days the week before legislature officially convenes. Excuse me. And what we started to see was they would sort of officially gavel in, but then not start committees until the following week. And that would allow bills to be made public and would allow folks like Sarah and I to begin reviewing bills and reading them and have access to them a little bit early. So right now, as it stands, we expect to see any bill that's been pre-session filed, we expect to see, I believe, in the first week of January. I can look at the dates whenever organizational days are for January. The week of January 9th is when we likely will see bills for the first time, is my expectation.
Thank you, Stacy. And thank you, Florence, for the question. So if we want to learn how to read a bill, so I actually clicked on the session tab here, the session circle, and then the 2022 regular session, which brought up this landing page. And I happen to know a bill number that I want to look up, which is House Bill 4101, I think. Yes, I think I chose correctly. So this was what we have referred to as the smoking buffer bill. And we are going to walk through how to read a bill. But first, I just want to point out a couple of things, let Stacy take a break from speaking for a second. A couple of things about this landing page. Here you have a link to the PDF for the current version of the bill. Here you have the overview of the bill. Here we can see the chief sponsors, the other sponsors, a little bit about the bill, some documents we'll talk about later. We can see that the current committee is the Senate Healthcare Committee. And then here you can see sort of the path of the bill. So it was first read on the 1st of February and referred to House Healthcare. See the H here indicates House. And then on February 7th, a public hearing was held, and you can link to the committee agenda, or you can link to the committee page with the hearing here. And then also on the 11th, they had a work session, which we learned last session is a vote. And here you can see the actual committee vote. You can see that they adopted an amendment. And then the rest of the path of the bill, which we'll come back to in a little bit. This landing page is very helpful. And with that, I think I will pull up the introduced version of the bill. So here you can see all the versions. The introduced version of the bill is the original version as introduced by the sponsor. So we pull that up. And here we have House Bill 4101, and I'm going to let Stacy walk you through this, and then I'll teach you how to read an amendment.
Yeah, I just want to walk through some of the features of a bill. It's not always completely clear, I think, exactly what you're looking at. So in terms of really understanding sort of the information in front of you, I'll just walk through some of the key features. So at the very top of each bill, first of all, you're going to have the legislative session and year. It's a good point to make sure you're looking at a current version of legislation, if that's what you think you're looking at. And of course, if you're doing legislative research, to make sure you're looking at the right bill. And then moving down, you see the measure number. And so wherever a member introduces the bill, that's where excuse me, I'm just getting over a terrible cold and have a bit of a cough. Give me 1 second.
And Stacey, if you need me to jump in, just give me the word.
Got it. I will definitely. I appreciate it. Thank you for bearing with me. If a House member introduces a bill, it's going to have a House bill. If a Senate member introduces a bill, it's going to have a Senate number. Bills that raise revenue must originate in the House. And again, I kind of mentioned the process that it doesn't officially become a bill until it goes through sort of the chief clerk or the sort of the secretary of the Senate. So there's that process where it comes from a legislative concept to becoming an actual measure. What's interesting is this is one of the few things that doesn't change about a bill is its number. It will always be that number from the beginning of the process through the end. Moving down, you see the list of sponsors, and this is the members that are sort of assuming responsibility for introducing the bill. And you'll see sometimes it's listed, you'll see chief sponsors, or I'm forgetting exactly how it's referenced, but sometimes you'll see chief sponsors separated out from sort of regular sponsors.
I'll add here, and I'll give you a chance to take a drink if you need, that sometimes you'll read a bill and you'll think, this is the worst bill ever. Like, why would someone introduce this? And then I just want to temper your passion, because oftentimes if a bill is terrible, it's not going to pass. And you can sometimes come to this sponsor section and find that perhaps it was introduced by the party that is in the minority, and it might have a political purpose, or it might just be introduced for a constituent and they have no intention of passing it, or given that if it isn't introduced by the minority party without any additional majority party sponsors, it's highly unlikely to pass. That's just the politics of the building. It's just highly unlikely to pass. So you can at least not panic if you see a bill that you think is terrible, if there, it only has one sponsor and that person is in the minority. So I'll
It's a really good point, Sarah. It's just another point of information for you to read and assess. And exactly, you can get a sense of potentially the path a bill might have, depending on who the sponsors are. I would also say too, in the past, it used to be like if a bill only had one name on it, that might have meant it didn't have a lot of support. I think in the remote world, that has changed a little bit because, of course, we had to be more efficient and we're getting bills drafted very quickly. But generally, folks that do the work that Sarah and I do, it's really important to, as much as possible, for most measures, you want a lot of support for it and you want maybe bipartisan support. So there is strategy behind who the sponsors are. So again, another piece of information for you to kind of think about as you're looking at legislation. So moving down, the next part is the summary, and this is also known as like the digest. This is written by legislative counsel, but I think that it's really important. The thing that I continually remind folks is if you are being asked to review a bill or provide your feedback or review on legislation, the summary is really helpful to give you a sense of what might be in the bill. However, it is very important to know that reading the summary is not the same as reviewing a bill. The summary is not legally binding. And in fact, in my many years doing this work, I have seen summaries that were wrong. They sometimes are just a small piece of maybe a very long bill. So there's lots of reasons to just remind you that a summary, again, is another important piece of information, but it is not the bill language. And if you're being asked to review a bill, please make sure that you actually read everything below the summary and not just the summary.
Yes, that's
my hill to die on. I will continue to say that everywhere I go.
I can't tell you how many times I've had a bill drafted and it's just obvious that the drafter doesn't really get the bill.
Yeah.
I mean, they did what I told them to do. They put the words in that I said, but they don't really understand the impact of it. And
Yeah.
so that is typically reflected in the summary.
So moving down under a bill for an act, you're going to see on line 2, relating to, and in this instance, it says relating to distance from certain places within which a person may not use inhalant. So this section right here, all before that semicolon, are referred to as the relating to clause. So what's so important about this is, and different states are different, but in Oregon, all of the contents of the bill have to be germane to this relating to clause. This becomes really important as session goes on because bills can get amended either entirely, where you delete all of the language after the relating to clause, or bits and pieces. But the key grounding factor is it has to be germane to the relating to clause. Now, again, folks that do the work that Sarah and I do, there's a lot of strategy that goes into deciding what you want your relating to clause to be. Sometimes you can ask for something very, very, very narrow because you do not want other people to tag on their little items to your bill. You don't want people to get really excited. You don't want it to be too much of an opportunity for other topics. There also might be times where you aren't entirely decided on exactly the approach you want to take on a policy, and maybe you want a broad relating to clause. When I'm watching legislation come in that's being filed and I see something like, for example, relating to transportation, I'm going to keep an eye on that bill from beginning to end if I care about transportation, because at some point, anything related to transportation could end up in that legislation. It could be amended in very quietly. So there's a lot of strategy and a lot of discussion, but the relating to clause is just incredibly important to legislation in Oregon.
And I'll just add that this is how a placeholder bill is drafted, is that it is, like, for example, in our case, it would be relating to public health, which is a very broad relating clause. So basically anything related to public health could be stuffed into this bill. But a lot of members, to meet the bill deadlines, will put in a placeholder bill because they don't know if or what they want to put in that bill. And so they get it drafted just with that relating to clause and maybe a couple of lines that mean absolutely nothing or that they fully intend to take out at a later date. And then they have their, what we call a placeholder bill. And I'm just going to time check us, Stacy.
Yeah.
10 minutes. So
I just saw that come up. So yeah, that's a really good reminder. So a couple of the other key points. So after this is the bill now. This is the contents, and you'll see the bill we have in front of us is pretty short, but you'll see past section 1, it talks about the ORS, the Oregon Revised Statute. that's going to be amended. And then what you have before you, it's important to remember that all of the plain text is existing Oregon revised statute. That's existing law. The text that is in italics, so you'll see down there on line 9, you'll see brackets and italics around the 10. That is language that is being proposed to be deleted from current statute. And then the bold-faced language, again, in this context, the 25, that is what's being proposed that's the proposed new language to add to statute. So that's just really important when reviewing a bill. Some bills will be very long. In this case, they're very short. Legislative Council will decide how much existing statute to include in a bill to provide enough context so you know what's being changed. And sometimes there's a lot of italics, sometimes there's a lot of bold-faced type, and it just really varies. Excuse me.
And so the one thing that I want to point out is not present in this bill is an effective date or an emergency clause. So those particular things, so an effective date is exactly what it sounds like. It tells you when the bill will go into effect. And then an emergency clause will state that it is an emergency and will go into effect upon passage. And what that means is when the governor signs it. And so both of those are missing from this bill. And so Stacy, what is the effective date of this bill if it were to have passed?
So without an emergency clause or without any specified date, if there's nothing listed, a measure is going to take effect on January 1 of the year following passage.
Exactly.
And the effective date can sometimes change the impact and your thoughts on a bill, right? So if a bill has a very soon effective date, maybe it's this big, broad policy change that you love, but maybe it's like, wait, we can't actually do that by this date. So the effective date can be really, really essential to sort of your feedback or review of a bill. So super important to pay attention to. And I'll just mention quickly 2 other things. There's the effective date of the bill, but sometimes you'll also see an operative date. So depending on how complex the legislation is, you might have an effective date. The bill might be effective and say it's an emergency, it goes into effect immediately, but maybe there are different portions of the bill that have different operative dates. So keep an eye out for that as well. And then the last thing that I'll mention is some bills also have a sunset clause. And so this might be a date whereby the policy is no longer effective. So those are just a few other pieces to be thinking about. And then Sarah, do you want to scroll down and see, do we have at the bottom, oh yeah, right there on the bottom on the left. I did want, since we talked so much about legislative concepts, on the bottom left, you'll see that says LC 47. What's really great about that is that if you do happen to see legislative concepts before session, they're going to have a number. And then when it does become a bill, they will print the legislative concept here. So you can match those up to be like, oh yes, this is in fact that one bill that I saw. Or maybe if it's different, you're like, oh, there's another one floating out there that's a very similar topic. So this is just a way for you to be able to connect a legislative concept with its actual bill number once it's introduced. And I think I'll pause there. I know we're kind of short on time, but I really think hopefully that gives you a strong overview of like how to read a bill, what all the different components are, and what you might be looking for.
Exactly. So back to the bills page. Under this tab here, amendments, we can see all the amendments that the legislature proposed. And we can see that this -2 amendment was adopted on the top line, and the rest of them were just proposed. They were not adopted. And back on the previous page, we can also see that the amendment was adopted here, and we can click here as well to see the amendment that was adopted. So very similar to a bill, you read an amendment the same way. However, so for example, here it says in line 8 of the printed bill, after 2, insert, and after line 15, insert. So really the important part here, I mean, you want to look at both of those, but looking at the introduced version of the bill, after line 15, so that's the end of the bill, is inserted, a person may smoke, aerolize, or vaporize an inhalant or carry a lighted smoking instrument within 25 feet, but not closer than 10 feet, to the parts described in subsection 2 of this section of a public place or place of employment that holds a license issued by the Oregon Liquor and Cannabis Commission. So essentially what this amounts to, this language amounts to a carve out for restaurants and bars so that they would not be subject to the 25 feet rule. So obviously, CLHO actually voted to oppose that amended version of the bill. So the House Healthcare Committee voted to adopt that amendment and then sent an amended version of the bill to the House floor where it passed. We can see here on February 17th, it passed 32 ayes, 20 nays, and 5 folks were excused from that vote. And then it went to the Senate President's desk later that day and was referred to Senate Healthcare, where there was another public hearing held. And we will go over this in a little bit more detail next time, but I testified on the bill. And so if you wanted to watch that testimony, you could review the committee hearing, or you could see my written testimony here under this tab, under the testimony tab. So it's arranged by oldest to newest. So here, down here was the opposed testimony because we did not want that carve out on that bill. And going back to the overview real quick. So you can see that the bill, they did not actually have the votes to pass the bill in the Senate Healthcare Committee. Senator Patterson actually introduced an amendment to take the bill back to the original version of the bill, to delete that section that was proposed. So here it says to delete those sections. And that then the bill did not have the votes to pass, so it died in committee. And Stacy, real quick, since we only have a few minutes, we want to talk just briefly about the analysis tab of this bill.
Yeah.
You can see some of the additional information available.
One of the little tricks if ever you're reviewing a bill or just trying to understand sort of what it actually does, one of the things I wanted to share, one of my favorite resources is what's called the staff measure summary. So Sarah, if you want to click on the very top, staff measure summary for 4101. So this is prepared by the legislative staff. And if you scroll down, so this is on the A engrossed version. That means this is the bill that passed out of the House. And so you've got a summary of the actions up top. Again, I want to point out that this is written, pretty quickly by staff, so it's not necessarily legally binding, but again, it gives you some good context and information. And then one of my favorite parts of this is at the bottom called the background. But you've got what the measure does, the effect of the measure, some of the items discussed. This little background section is really great if you're ever reading a bill and you're like, where in the world did this come from? Or hasn't this been talked about? Or like, what's the history? So you'll see that this is just a little bit of context. It's a little nugget of information that I find to be really, really helpful. And I always love to click on this and just see, how staff are talking about it and where this came from. So this just talks a little bit about some of the work around Oregon's Indoor Clean Air Act. Another resource that I find useful, and you can see that they'll do staff measure summaries on bills that are likely to move. And they'll do them on proposed amendments as well. You won't always see a staff measure summary for a bill. Either their staff is over capacity and doesn't have the ability. It's also potentially an indication that a bill's not moving. If a legislator wants a bill to move, if a committee has indicated a bill's moving, they will request a staff measure summary. So another little piece of information that's just kind of a good tip and trick.
And lastly, I'll just tell you all that a bill cannot move out of a policy committee without a fiscal impact statement and a revenue impact statement. This information tells the legislature how much a bill will cost. That is the fiscal impact statement, often referred to as a FIS, F-I-S. And, if the bill will generate income, like, it increases taxes, it will have a revenue impact statement as well. And that is the RIS, the RIS. So here, for example, fiscal impact statement, we can click on that. And then we can see basically that it has minimal expenditure impact. So there would be a little bit of, tiny bit of implementation probably through OHA, but minimal impact. And so with that paperwork on file, the committee can then move the bill out if they have the votes. And I believe, Stacy, is there any last parting words that you want to share, or shall we take a few questions if folks have a minute to stick around?
I think we touched on a lot of really great pieces. I'm sure there's more to discuss and more to find on the website, but happy to stick around for a few minutes if anyone has any questions.
And yeah, we'll post the slides and the video on our CLHO website so that when you are looking back through this, and trying to navigate the legislature's website, you can look back through this and review and go step by step. Any questions before we close out for the day? Hearing none, I think we can let you go and say thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you here next time.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Sarah.